Before my dad was affected by dementia, the term dementia was rarely heard of in social media, news, newspapers, or TV programs. It was not a widely discussed topic. However, after my dad passed away, I noticed that the word dementia became increasingly common. It began to receive more attention in social media, and the government also acknowledged the rising prevalence of dementia in our country. The emotional toll on caregivers also started to be seriously addressed. When we confirmed that my dad was in a state of dementia, my neighbor told me about her grandpa's behavioral changes after he was affected by dementia. He became very bad-tempered and would often scold her mother, who was his caregiver. I shared with her that my dad had always been of good temperament since his younger days, and even now, he continued to speak gently even when he was angry. One day, when I told him that I would lift him up for his meal, he smiled and laughed, saying, "You are a lady, why don't you use a gentle word? Lift is for lifting a dead body." Ha ha. He maintained his gentle nature. From our childhood, he taught us to use proper language, eat properly, and sit properly. Since my dad underwent the knee replacement operation, his legs were not as strong, despite the pain diminishing. I bought him a commode chair to be placed next to his bedside, so he didn't have to walk to the toilet. Even when he became bedridden, the commode chair remained tied next to his bed to prevent him from rolling off. However, the chair alone was not sufficient to prevent falls, so I added a sofa set near the bed at night. One morning, when I returned home from the market, I found that half of his body was hanging. His upper body was lodged between the bed and the commode chair, while his lower body was about to fall off the bed. I quickly reached him and brought him back onto the bed, expressing my concern about how close he came to falling. Surprisingly, he responded as if nothing had happened, saying, "He is falling down, not me." I noticed that he was actively rolling to the left or right, so I asked him if he was feeling itchy. He smiled and nodded in agreement. Itches are common for people who wear diapers, and after medication for a week, the rolling would stop once the itch subsided. Since then, I requested my youngest brother to monitor him through a security camera that was tilted to face my dad's bed. If my brother spotted any risks, he would contact me through his mobile phone. Although I willingly took care of my dad after he got knee replacement operation, I was glad to see him smiling and eager to eat the food I cooked. However, the situation changed, and he spent most of his time in bed. Bathing, feeding, and managing his bowel movements became extremely challenging for me for the beginning month. I told him, "I am your daughter," and he giggled and laughed skeptically. He couldn't believe what I said. So, I asked him, "Do you think I am too old to be your daughter?" He smiled without replying. Due to his weakened heart, he seldom spoke. Sometimes, he would say a lot when he asked me to buy breakfast or lunch for his invisible alien friends or deceased uncles and aunties. There were moments when I lost my temper or felt mentally unstable due to lack of medical knowledge. It was inevitable given the circumstances. One time, when my dad had diarrhea, I became frustrated and said, "Why do you keep having bowel movements? I just changed your diaper less than 5 minutes ago." My dad responded, "Are you stupid? Can I control it?" His words snapped me out of my frustration, realizing that it was my mistake for overprescribing the constipation medicine out of impatience. I quickly apologized and told him I was wrong. From that moment on, I vowed never to get upset or angry with him again. I reminded myself of a mantra: to be happy, I will survive a day. To be sad, I will also need to survive for a day. Since I am still living, I must live happily every day. Every morning, I carefully used the hoist to bring him to the commode and rolled him onto the toilet, encouraged him with a gentle pooing sound to stimulate his bowel movement. Sometimes, he would follow along, saying poo poo poo. He was a lovely father. During bathing, I would sing songs or read poetry to him. Even though he only had the strength to say the last 3 words, his short-term memory remained surprisingly intact. He would follow along with the poem, helping me to complete it by providing the last 3 letters. With a burst of energy from his weak heart, he would utter those few words loudly. His talent for participating in this way amused me, and it brought joy to both of us, even in those brief moments. I realized that every day was a new challenge. While I faced the difficulties of caring for him, I also cherished the precious moments we shared. Despite his memory loss and the limitations he faced, there were still glimpses of his true self. It was in those moments that I felt an indescribable connection, a deep appreciation for the person he had been and the person he still was, even in the midst of dementia. My dad was born in 1925 in China, before the Second World War. At the age of 12, he came to Singapore, where he worked and studied. Eventually, he started his dental practice with his only cousin, who was 12 years older than him. One afternoon, my dad suddenly burst out loudly speaking in Japanese, which I couldn't understand. I quickly approached him and asked, "What are you trying to say?" He replied, "I instructed the Japanese doctor to release my friends." Surprised, I asked, "Have you found him?" He responded, "I will go and look for him." Then he went back to sleep. About an hour later, he woke up, and I asked him, "Have you found your Japanese friend, the doctor?" He nodded with a smile and said, "Yes." It seemed as if he had traveled back to the Japanese occupation period in his mind. My dad had an incredibly strong appetite. Every 3 to 4 hours, he would expect to be fed. Some people, like my aunt, suggested that my dad might have been possessed by a spirit, which caused his increased hunger. I have no idea, as older people tend to have all kinds of frightening stories and beliefs. I even reminded my dad once, saying, "Look. Your stomach is so big, you should eat less." He smiled and touched his stomach, then replied, "Inside has a baby, hee hee." He suddenly became cheeky and amused me. I was instantly left speechless. My dad was a lovely old man. When my dad was admitted to the hospital due to a urinary infection, the hospital food alone was not sufficient for him. I prepared extra meals of my own cooking to supplement his diet. Otherwise, he would have trouble sleeping at night. One night, while we were at home, he suddenly told me, "I just came back from a school meeting," and added, "I got promoted. Now, I am a school director." I was puzzled and asked, "Are you a dentist or a school teacher?" He giggled and replied, Same. It was perplexing. I couldn't tell if my dad was becoming confused or if he was somehow influenced by the spirit of his father. Regardless, I didn't bother to dig deeper to find the truth because there was no way to know for certain. I always believed that if spirits are present, we should let them be. There is no need to fear their existence, instead, we should treat them as a part of our natural world. In the Book of Confucius, Jilu asked about serving the spirits of the dead. The master said, "While you are not able to serve men, how can you serve their spirits?" Jilu added, "I venture to ask about death." He was answered, "While you do not know life, how can you know about death?" During the period I was serving both a man and a spirit, I wasn't sure of the boundaries. My grandfather was a teacher who joined the Communist Party before my father was born. Unfortunately, there were rumors that he was killed during the conflict between the Kuomintang, National Revolutionary Army, and the Communist Party. Since the day my dad shouted in the middle of the night 2 years ago, saying I don't want to go, and even now, when he sometimes claims he was a teacher, I suspect that his dad or my grandfather may have arrived at my house. As I mentioned earlier, I was not afraid. Sometimes in the midnight, my dad would tell me to call uncles and aunties, only this type of circumstances he got enough breath to speak. In the last 3 months before he passed away, he was busy trying to contact his only cousin, who was also a dentist but had passed away over 45 years ago. My dad said he had his contact number and asked me to call him. He said, "I want to speak to him." Life is amazing, as if we are sometimes living in the transition between life and death. Perhaps one day, before I leave this planet, I will come to know what happened to my dad and my grandfather. In the last 3 months before my dad reached the end of his journey, more expected incidents occurred. I called them supernature and not ghosts. Ghost was not a pleasant word, and when I used it, I felt uneasy. No matter what, I was still a living figure, and I don't like negative words disturbing my steady mind. In the next episode, I will share why I knew my dad was about to leave this world. Was the old man standing at the gate 2 years ago returning? By sharing my experiences, I hope to provide some clues to those who are taking care of dementia patients. I also hope to hear from others who have had supernatural experiences. Thank you for joining me on this heartfelt journey. Stay tuned for the continuation of my dad's journey into the world of dementia.